This is Super Mario Odyssey, released in 2017. About halfway through the game, Mario arrives in a level called Metro Kingdom, better known as New Donk City. Unlike most Mario worlds, which usually have a colorful, cartoon-like feel and environment, this one looks and feels much more realistic. The buildings are tall and detailed, streets are filled with yellow taxi cabs and pedestrians wearing business suits, and the overall setting clearly resembles a modern American city. Along with this visual shift comes a musical shift. The theme that plays while Mario explores the city streets sounds very different from the bright, playful music often associated with the Mario franchise. Instead of light electric melodies, we hear a big band jazz style, with prominent brass, a swing-like rhythm, and theatrical energy. Nintendo is known for being quite direct in how it matches the music to its environment, and here the connection feels especially clear. The sound doesn't just accompany the city, it immediately signals to the player. The question I want to explore is, why does this particular sound feel like a city right away? What I want to suggest is that music does more than just set a mood. It's communicating cityness through a set of recognizable musical cues that many listeners already associate with American urban settings. In other words, the sound of New Donk City isn't neutral, it draws on familiar styles that carry cultural meaning. To understand how that works, we can't just look at the music alone. We also need to think about how it interacts with the game's visuals, where this style of music comes from historically, and how people learn to connect certain sounds with certain places. Taking a look through all those lenses helps to explain why this level feels so immediately urban. If we listen closely to the New Donk City theme, a few things stand out immediately. The most prominent sound is the brass section, especially the trumpets and saxophones, which sit right at the front of the mix. This overall style resembles what's often called big band jazz, a style built around strong brass sections supported by piano, bass, and drums. Big band music is known for its bold, full sound, and that brightness is very present here. If you shift your attention to the rhythm underneath, you can hear what's often called a swing feel, a slightly uneven, bouncy rhythm that creates a sense of movement instead of sounding straight or mechanical. The rhythm has a forward push that keeps everything in motion. That movement doesn't really stop. Even when the melody changes, the rhythm keeps driving underneath. The structure of the piece also reinforces that energy. It loops in a way that feels continuous rather than resolved. What's important here isn't just which instruments are being used, but how they're working together. The bright brass, the driving rhythm, and the quick time create a sound that feels busy and layered. It doesn't sound calm or organic, it sounds built, structured, and engineered in a way that mirrors the environment Mario is walking through. Cities are often imagined as places that never sleep, full of movement, noise, and constant activity. This music carries that same restless energy. It has a pulse. It feels alive, but in a constructed way. This is very different from the softer, more whimsical music heard in many other Mario worlds. Here, the sound is bold and assertive. That contrast makes the city feel intentional, almost as though it belongs to a different reality. And that's where we start to see how the music works together with the visual design of the level. When Mario enters New Donk City, the visual design immediately stands apart from most of the other Mario worlds. The buildings are tall and detailed, there are traffic lights, yellow taxi cabs, sidewalks, and realistically proportioned people walking through the streets. This level doesn't look whimsical or fantastical, it looks like a recognizable American city. But visuals alone don't fully determine how we experience a space. A city can look realistic, but it can feel calm, tense, dark, or chaotic depending on how it sounds. Here, the music plays a guiding role. It doesn't just accompany the environment, it helps define how we interpret it. The bright brass and energetic rhythm make the city feel lively and active rather than quiet or threatening. The sound suggests movement, performance, and constant activity. If this exact same level were paired with slow ambient music, the space would feel entirely different, even though the buildings and streets would remain the same. The music tells us not just where we are, but what kind of place this is. It's worth noticing that this isn't simply a modern city. The formal clothing worn by many characters, the design of the taxis, and the big band jazz style all suggest a slightly nostalgic version of American urban life. This feels less like a contemporary metropolis and more like a stylized mid-20th century image of New York, a city shaped by performance, theater, and jazz culture. To understand why this particular style of music so clearly communicates that version of the city, we need to look briefly at where this sound comes from. To understand why this music so clearly communicates city, we have to look briefly at where this sound comes from. Big band jazz reached its peak in the mid-20th century, during what's often called the swing era, roughly from the mid-1930s and through to the 1940s. Large jazz orchestras became especially prominent in American cities, where there were dance halls, theaters, radio studios, and major performance venues. New York City played a central role in this scene. It was home to music publishers, booking agencies, broadcast networks, and famous venues like the Savoy Ballroom and Roseland. Bands could perform live, record in studio, broadcast on radio, and build national reputations from the city. Because of this, the big band sound became closely associated with urban nightlife and entertainment culture. It was music designed for crowded rooms, bright lights, movement, and performance. Broadway also reinforced this connection. Large ensembles, theatrical arrangements, and brassy showmanship became part of the soundscape of New York City's entertainment district. Jazz and theater culture overlapped in ways that strengthened the idea of the city as energetic and performative. Even after the swing era ended, this sound didn't disappear. It continued to appear in film, television, and commercials, where it often signaled sophistication, glamour, and metropolitan life. So when we hear big band jazz today, we don't just hear instruments, we hear a cultural memory, one shaped by decades of association between this sound and American urban life, and it's that memory that New Donk City draws on. The reason this musical style communicates city so effectively isn't just historical, it's cultural. We aren't born hearing brass and swing as urban, we learn to hear it that way. Throughout the 20th century, big band jazz appeared again and again in film, radio, broadcast, theater productions, and later television and advertising. In North American media especially, it became closely tied to representations of city life, nightlife, performance, sophistication, and movement. Over time, those repeated pairings between sound and place shaped how audiences interpret the music. Culture, in a simple sense, is the shared set of practices and meanings people learn through everyday life. We absorb patterns through repetition. We learn what certain sounds are supposed to mean because we encounter them in similar contexts again and again. So for many audiences familiar with American media traditions, when we hear bright brass and a swing rhythm layered over images of tall buildings and busy streets, the association feels natural, even though it isn't. It feels obvious because it has been reinforced socially. This is how musical tropes work. A trope is simply a familiar pattern that creators can rely on because audiences already recognize it. Composers don't have to explain what the music means. They trust that listeners will bring their own cultural knowledge to it. In the case of New Donk City, the game relies on that shared recognition. It assumes that many players will hear this as city music, even if they can't explain why, and that recognition is cultural, not accidental. If we step back, we can see that each discipline answers a different part of the same question. Music helps us describe what the New Donk City theme actually sounds like: the brass, the swing rhythm, and the big band style. Media studies helps us understand how that sound works inside the game. It doesn't just exist on its own, it guides how we interpret the space, it shapes how the city feels. History explains where that association comes from. Big band jazz became tied to American urban life during the swing era, especially in cities like New York. Over time, it came to represent a particular image of metropolitan culture. And anthropology explains why we recognize that meaning today. Through repeated exposure in North American media, we've learned to associate that sound with city life. The meaning isn't natural, it's culturally shared. When we put these together, something important becomes visible. The music in New Donk City is not just background decoration. It's performing narrative work. It communicates cultural and geographic identity without stating it directly. It tells us what kind of city this is, and it does so by drawing on a shared musical trope, a culturally recognizable sound that signals American urban space. This is why interdisciplinary research matters here. No single discipline fully explains how this meaning is produced. But together, they reveal how sound, history, media, and culture combine to shape how we experience the virtual world. If we focus specifically on video games, this example raises a larger question. If New Donk City sounds the way it does because it draws on a shared urban musical trope, what about other game cities? Why does a cyberpunk city sound different from a cartoon city? Why does a noir detective game use muted brass and slow jazz? Why do futuristic cities rely on electronic textures instead of swing rhythms? In each case, music communicates what kind of urban space we are entering. It signals time period, cultural identity, tone, and moral atmosphere. Game music often performs this work quietly. Players rarely stop to analyze it. But it shapes how we understand the environment. It tells us whether a city feels glamorous, dangerous, modern, nostalgic, chaotic, or playful. And because these associations are culturally shared, composers can rely on them. They don't need to explain what the city is. The music is doing that work instantly. So rather than thinking of game music as background decoration, we might start to see it as part of how games construct meaning. It becomes a tool for world building. And that idea, that music communicates cultural identity in virtual spaces, is what my larger research project will explore. Now, hopefully after watching this, when you hear the New Donk City theme, it becomes harder to hear it as just background music. You can hear the brass section differently, hear the swing rhythm differently. You can recognize that it isn't just energetic, it's culturally specific. The music is really doing something. It's telling us what kind of city this is. It's shaping how we experience the space. And it's drawing on shared cultural knowledge to do that work quietly and effectively. If that's true here, then it raises a larger question. How often does video game music rely on these kinds of familiar patterns? How many environments in video games communicate identity through sound before we even consciously notice? To explore that idea a little bit further, I'd like to try a short listening exercise that we'll do once we're in class together.